Um, Welcome. Thank you very much for coming to Kneading Equity. I'm Amy Halloran, and I lead Artisan Grain Collaborative's Education and Outreach Working Group. This is a forum for AGC members to connect with the public about their work, build relationships, and create educational bridges. This hour-long recorded talk is one of the working group's many activities. The Artisan Grain Collaborative is a network of more than 140 farmers, processors, food and beverage makers and manufacturers, and advocates working collectively to diversify the landscape in the Midwest. We envision a thriving regional staple crop economy that stewards our ecosystems, strengthens connections between rural and urban places, and ensures food security. I'm excited to introduce this conversation between AGC Steering Committee member Rachel Bernier-Green of Laine's Bake Shop in Chicago, and Shirley Sherrod and Paul Jones of New Communities in Albany, Georgia. New Communities farmers grow pecans, and bakers within the AGC network, including Rachel, have been making delicious things with them, like granola, sweet buns, cookies, and bread. This connection between the Midwest and South happened because of Red Tomato, a Rhode Island-based food hub and the marketing agent for New Communities pecans. There are many reasons we are excited about this cross-regional partnership. First, tree production is an important aspect of sustainable agriculture, and we don't currently grow pecans at a commercial scale in the upper Midwest. We hope this work helps pave the way for increased identity-preserved regional sourcing of nuts like hazelnuts and chestnuts that are increasingly being grown here. Secondly, pecans and other nuts are largely misunderstood staple crops with high nutritional value and cultural importance, similar to many of the grains, pseudo-cereals, legumes, and oil seeds that the AGC network works with. And thirdly, as we are making new paths to food in the Midwest, we are mindful of the urgent need to broaden access to land and other business opportunities for Black and brown farmers and food makers. The work of New Communities and the development of this connection to local bakeries offers an example of how to leverage relationships and supply chains to advance equity. A few words about the speakers. My colleague, Rachel Bernier-Green, is the owner of Laine's Bake Shop, a baked goods manufacturer that leverages businesses to tackle chronic unemployment, recidivism, and wealth inequality in the hardest hit areas of Chicago. Rachel also founded and leads the Economic Justice Academy, a holistic financial empowerment platform designed to create sustainable Black wealth through a combination of education, implementation, and advocacy. Shirley Sherrod was Georgia State Director for Rural Development at the U.S. Department of Agriculture during part of the Obama administration and is co-founder of New Communities, a pioneering land trust that began more than 50 years ago and was born out of the civil rights movement. Paul Jones serves on the board of New Communities and acts as its operations manager. Paul is a retired mechanical engineer from Procter & Gamble and is now very active in Tuskegee University. As they share their personal and business journeys and discuss how food and agriculture can be used as a community catalyst, we welcome questions. Please write them in the chat and we will get to them as we can. Before we begin, Michael Rosine will say a few words about Red Tomato. Michael?
Thank you. Shirley Sherrod, New Communities and Red Tomato first came together around 2001. Red Tomato had just started inside the fair trade, worker-owned cooperative equal exchange. Betty McKenzie of Red Tomato and Shirley Sherrod came together around the possibility of marketing watermelons in the Northeast. Watermelons grown in Southwest Georgia. At Red Tomato, we were just in the process of translating fair trade from the international model, trade between farmer co-ops in developing countries, and companies and nonprofits in developed nations like the US, adapting it to a domestic and a local setting, which was all new for fair trade. Working with watermelon growers in Southwest Georgia didn't exactly fit the locally grown mold, but working with Federation of Southern Cooperatives, where Shirley Sherrod was working, was a natural fit. And so the relationship began. Over 4 years together, we grew and sold about 20 truckloads, just under 1 million pounds of seeded and seedless watermelons that ended up selling in supermarkets in the Northeast. The relationship continued after we stopped the watermelon program in 2005, and we stayed friends and in loose contact. In 2019, Shirley Sherrod called with another proposition. It was time for another collaboration, this time around pecans, really good pecans, in a program managed by board member Paul Jones. Once again, we've taken a fair trade approach to selling and have Equal Exchange and the food hub Happy Dirt in North Carolina as the initial 2 main customers. And then in 2020, another call for collaboration came in from the Artisan Grain Collaborative. And so we were introduced to a whole new group of creative, committed people who are now surrounding us on this Zoom call. We look forward to hearing more from you as well.
Great, thank you, Michael. My name is Rachel Bernier Green, and I want to thank everyone so much for being here. I'm very excited to be here with Paul and Shirley today for this conversation. But before we get started, I do have a quick question for both of you. How do you pronounce pecans? I know that's a point of contention. I was listening to Michael and I said, that's not quite how I say it. So I was wondering how the two of you say it. I think you're on mute, Shirley.
I grew up saying pecans. I grew up on a farm, and then later, as I worked with the folks at Ben and Jerry's ice cream company, and always dealing with someone from the Northeast, I started saying pecans. So I used both of them.
That sounds about like my story. I say pecans. My grandma says pecans. Yeah, a little bit of everything. But as Amy was mentioning, I am a recovering accountant turned serial social entrepreneur. 10 years ago, I was in a job that I often describe as soul sucking. And I thought that my way to find purpose was to do volunteer work while I was working, but I was often working over 100 hours a week. And I realized that that was a balance that just wasn't going to work for me. But while I was there, I remembered in college, I was introduced to the idea of social entrepreneurship. And I've always been kind of intellectually curious. I was a kid that was always asking questions. And I also studied all the things in college, and people often would ask, why are you looking into all of these things? What can you possibly do with this kind of piecemeal knowledge that you're accumulating? But when I started to think about social entrepreneurship, that really kind of helped me to dig in to the history of the social entrepreneurship model. I looked at historical precedent here in the US. I also looked at global examples, and I realized the issues that I cared about kind of came down to the intersection of 3 things: social justice, food justice, and economic justice. And part of why I'm so excited about this conversation today is because as I've learned more about Paul and Shirley, I know that new communities, right before it was started, I think, Shirley, I know your husband was part of the SNCC group that went to Israel. Were you also involved in that group? Oh, I think you're on mute again.
No, I didn't go. Our daughter was just 3 months old.
Oh, wow. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that before, but it was really exciting to see how Paul and Shirley and everyone involved in new communities have leveraged international examples, the broader civil rights movement to create what we know today. And so that overlap between what I've been really interested in and what they've done. I can't wait until we dig into that. So the last thing I'll say before we really jump in is that while digging into all of those, doing all that research, I realized that what I wanted to do was build a mission-driven business. And that's different from, if any of you are in corporate areas, there's something called corporate social responsibility, or CSR, that we hear a lot about when a company, and we saw a lot of this over the past 18 months or so, where a company adopts a cause and they slap a dollar amount or give their employees a few hours to go volunteer, and then they say that they're great social citizens. So social entrepreneurship moves beyond that to actually making the core of the business about achieving this purpose. And so because of that, we even use kind of our overarching mission when it comes to sourcing. So you might ask, if we are a local baking manufacturer in Chicago, why on earth are we interested in purchasing pecans from new communities? And the short answer to that is that in our purchasing matrix, which I use to try to decide who our vendors are, instead of just saying, hey, we're going with the local company or we're going with an organic company, we have an entire list that kind of goes through those 3 areas of intersection I mentioned earlier. And so we prioritize cooperative models, whether that is an employee-owned companies or other types of cooperative models. We look at the entire value chain for those vendors to make sure that people are being paid fairly and equitably throughout that process. And we're looking for great quality. So we have a whole list of things that we look at, and working with new communities checks off so many of those boxes that it was kind of a no-brainer to get a great quality product that fit in so well with our purchasing. So now we're going to jump in a little bit. And Shirley, I want to start with you and see if you can give us some background. I know I alluded to a few things on the development of new communities and the values and purposes behind this kind of unique and foundational farming enterprise that you guys have developed.
I want to say thank you, Rachel, and it's good to be with everyone virtually and to share information about new communities and the work that we're doing. You know, my husband was one of the founding members of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and he chose Southwest Georgia as the place to do his work. One of the things we realized early on was that as we were assisting people with registering to vote or to have their kids integrate the white schools or to exercise their rights in other ways, they would get kicked off the land owned by white landowners. And that's what prompted the trip to Israel, to look at how they were resettling their people. Also part of that group was Bob Swan from the Northeast, who had done work around land trusts. So upon their return, we started meeting and decided we would go for it. We would definitely look at creating something that would give our people a chance to own, to grow, and to be all that they can be as citizens of this country. And immediately some land was available in Lee County, Georgia. We made the decision to get an option on it. It was 5,735 acres of land, 6,000 acres more or less. We also decided early on that we didn't just want someone, our group, coming in to say, to make all of the plans that would then be available to everyone else. We knew we wanted the people from this area to be involved in in the planning and to be an integral part of everything that happened with new communities. So we had initially what's called charrettes, where people came in and participated in planning this 6,000 acres of land, planning where the villages would be located, planning what kind of housing we would have, the planning what kind of educational system we wanted, what kind of health system, and the kind of farming we would actually do. So everyone, if you were interested, if you wanted to live on the land, there was a space for everyone to be a part of this effort and to be fully engaged in what happened at this new community that that we called it. The thing that really got, and the plans were really great. I have a copy of the plan that was developed where the consultants came in and really worked with us. And it's just amazing looking at them now, because not only did we plan, you know, housing and education and farming and so forth, we talked about how we would work with each other. So we were promoting a new model for working with each other to build the kind of community we wanted to live in. What happened though was that white people in the area started organizing against the effort. And where OEO, the Office of Economic Opportunity, had given us a direct grant from Washington for the planning and had assured us at the end of that year of planning, we would actually get some major money through OEO to move this effort forward. Because of the opposition from white people in the area, in this area of Georgia and in the state, they made a decision once all of the planning was done that they could not give us the money that had been really they had promised. Lester Maddox was the governor of the state of Georgia at the time, and he ended up vetoing all money coming into the state to our project. So for a couple of years, we faced foreclosure, but we kept working and finally got some better financing and started farming. We couldn't build the houses. We couldn't bring industry in. We couldn't set up the kind of educational system that we wanted, although we did have a daycare center. And we couldn't implement those plans that we had spent so long. We had 500 families wanting to move on to the property. None of that could happen because we didn't have the money to do the things we thought we would be able to do. But we actually worked together to hold on to the land with the profits from the farm. We could make the land payments and expand the farming operation until we ran into a drought and ended up going to Farmers Home Administration, and then entered into a 3-year fight because the county supervisor said we'd get a loan over his dead body. Of course, just like they've done through the years to help Black farmers lose land, once they get a lien on your property, then they can make loans come late if you get them at all. You can't borrow the amount you needed for the operation. And all of the things they've done through the years to make Black farmers lose farmland is what was done to us. And we lost everything in 1985.
I just want to make a point there that one, that is a tragic series of events, but two, as you said, that there's so much historical precedent for it, which is why I think it's important as we're having this conversation and we're talking about the overlap between social and economic justice, why it's so important not to separate those two issues, because going all the way back to Reconstruction, when there were the freedmen banks that didn't have the same protections as white-owned banks, and speculators would come in and gamble the money that Black families were putting in these banks because they were promised that their money was safe and they could use this to buy property and to accumulate wealth. And then because there was no oversight, repeatedly, those funds were gambled away and that promise was stolen. And I think when we separate those two issues, it doesn't make the relationship gets blurry over the years. So I do think that that's really critical to address directly, that promises are made and that they're broken, and that we need to address the totality of that issue before we move forward, because you cannot, contrary to many popular beliefs, you cannot work yourself out of poverty. Sometimes you can keep your head above water, but it's almost impossible to do so. So Paul, I want to kind of loop you in. Can you tell me a little bit? I know that you are Shirley's brother-in-law, but can you tell me a little bit more about how you came to be involved with New Communities and what the organization has meant to you over the years?
Good afternoon, everyone. And I am also happy to be on this panel. I've been personally involved with New Communities only since 2011, though I've known about it and known about its work for years. But I can personally relate to its mission. Shirley mentioned that one of the driving factors for starting New Communities was the fact that a lot of African-American Black farmers who were sharecroppers were kicked off of the land because of their involvement in the civil rights movement. And I can relate to that because I was a sharecropper. My family was sharecroppers. And though we didn't get kicked off the land, many of the experiences that sharecroppers had, I can assure you that I experienced all of them. So when I graduated from high school, I decided that I wanted to get away from the farm and from Georgia. So I moved to Orlando, Florida, and spent a couple of years there. And from there went on to Tuskegee University, which I loved very, very dearly. You can see in my background. And graduated from Tuskegee with a degree in mechanical engineering and went to P&G Procter & Gamble here in Cincinnati. Someone mentioned at the beginning that I am the operations manager for New Communities, which is somewhat strange since I live in Cincinnati. But I worked at Procter & Gamble for 32 years, retired. At my retirement, I was director of global engineering for our snacks and beverage industry, which kind of relates to some of the discussions we're having now about the food chain. So when I retired, I had two plans. One was to continue to work with Tuskegee, which I do. I serve as and still serve as the chair of the College of Engineering Industry Advisory Group. And I'm also an active member of the Tuskegee Airmen. So I had planned to work with those two organizations. And in 2010, I believe, when New Communities purchased Cypress Pond, the new 1,600 plus acres, I was invited down to participate and was asked to serve on the board, which I agreed to do. And with a little bit of arm twisting, I decided to help the organization in the volunteer position as operations manager for 6 weeks, I believe it was. And that was in 2011. So here I am, I'm still here. And the reason is I can so much relate to the mission of New Communities. As I said, I was a sharecropper. And I know and even though we don't have a lot of sharecroppers now, we do have a lot of Black farmers who are still struggling. And New Communities' mission is all about helping those farmers to not only survive, but to succeed. And with my experiences in traveling and working globally in many, many different countries, and my business experiences, my belief is I have a gift in terms of not only the business perspective, but in my work at P&G, I did a lot of work around building collaboratives and partnerships in the engineering organization. So I'm bringing that experience to New Communities. And as I said, my personal experience relates very closely with the mission of New Communities, and I'm doing all that I can do to make sure that it's successful.
Wonderful. And so that I think is a good lead into my next point. I know we just talked a little bit before about working yourself out of poverty, and we're talking about farmers and communities and building community wealth. And we know that hard work is necessary, but without opportunity and the appropriate support, it only goes so far. So can either of you touch on why New Communities is structured the way it is, and maybe explain the concept of a land trust for those that aren't familiar with it?
Sorry. As I said early on, we made the decision that we didn't just want to create something that people would come in and out of. We really wanted something that people felt was theirs. And we wanted this community to be that kind of an effort. So based on information gathered on the trip to Israel, and the information we all had and the experiences we had, we decided to really create the community land trust, because we felt that was the way we could accomplish a lot of what we were thinking we could do, involving people who in some cases had never been involved in anything in a business way or in a planning way. We wanted to bring our people along with education. And as I said earlier, just trying to get our folk to look at how we work with each other. You know, that was so important. One example I can give you, I can't give it to you in housing or education or the industry. We had committees for each part of new communities, but we did operate the farm in the way we wanted all of the committees to operate. So every Monday night, the farm committee met, and the farm committee consisted of the farm manager, 3 members from the board of directors, and everyone who was working on the farm. Now, in that meeting, everyone had input and everybody had a vote. We understood that once we were out there working on the farm manager was the person who was leading the show at that point. And where you could disagree or try to change something that was being done was in that farm committee meeting. And we had those, as I said, every Monday night where we did the plannings. And that meant anyone in whatever position they were in had just as much of a vote as anyone else, as the farm manager, for example. And that's what we tried to promote with our people. Now, there were a lot of folks, back in those days, you'd have those insurance guys showing up at folks' house to get $1 or whatever for those insurance policies that didn't mean much money at all. But they would really be trying to do a job on our people, trying to say, you get a house there, you won't own anything. Yeah, you wouldn't. We decided to keep, as I said earlier, we had lost a lot of land as Black people, because people would mortgage it for a car or a TV or whatever and end up losing it. And so holding the land in trust so that we all owned it was one way we felt we could keep from losing the land. People would own their home and get a long-term renewable lease on the land that it sat on. But that, you're looking at 1970, 71, even today, that's a stretch for some people, even though they've seen that it does work, and it makes it easier or makes it better to try to help people get wealth in terms of getting a home. So that's why we chose that route. And had we not had so much opposition to what we were trying to do, we'd have a thriving community going on right now in Lee County, Georgia. But of course, we were run off the property, and they sold it. Farm Service Agency sold it to a rich person out of Atlanta who paid 1/5 of what it was worth. And then he proceeded to dig holes and push every building we had on the property in holes wherever they were located, except for the brick house that was on the property.
And so I know that obviously is very frustrating, because that was not the way that you envisioned new communities when you began it. But I want to step back and talk a little bit about the impact that, even though you faced all of those circumstances, when you look online, you see all these people sharing stories of growing up there and how it impacted their lives to this day. Can you talk about some of the successes that you encountered despite those obstacles?
Yes, we have some people who went on to farm because of what they learned there on the property. We have others, because of how we operated, we were able to get them into college and assisted them as they were going through. There's an attorney here, one of my sisters, actually went to Talladega College in Alabama, because at that time the United Church of Christ was giving my husband 20 scholarships a year that we could give to rural children, rural Black people here in this area. So we were doing a lot of things. Just one of the major things we were working on, which was to build that community. We could not make it happen because, you know, white people were so much against it. And in every turn, there were times when we'd plant corn, for example, and back then we were using liquid fertilizer. And you wouldn't know until the crop was up that what you paid for wasn't what you got. You know, the corn would be 2 feet high or 4 feet high all over the field. And it prompted us back then to actually pull a sample from every delivery, you know, to get it analyzed. I mean, I could tell you how we caught one couple of white people in a car stealing hogs, pigs we had a 75 brood sow operation. And they actually caught them in the next county, but said, "Oh no, these are not them," and let them go. You know, so we caught some just stealing corn out of the field. I could go on and on about things that they did to us that in many cases would have been so discouraging you would give up, but we were not those kind of people. We knew we had to keep fighting, and we did that. Now things changed in later years. I don't mean change, there's still opposition to what we were trying to do. So I'm not talking about that kind of change. And we still have to be on guard to check and recheck deliveries and so forth that we get. And even with the pecans, we were barely getting anything for them. Because we had to take them to the local market and selling them in shell, and we getting $1 and something per pound, or in some cases maybe a little more, $2, a little over, and not making anything from them. It was only when we had a white person working with us in the 90s when I was dealing with Ben and Jerry's. We couldn't even get a local processor to process for us with us paying them. Ben and Jerry's had to use their major supplier for that, because none of them were willing to work with us, saying, "I tell you what we'll do. We will buy the pecans from Black farmers, and we will process them and sell them to Ben and Jerry's ice cream company." That wasn't what was supposed to be happening. So when we started looking into getting them processed at new communities, we actually had a white person working with us who was well respected and well known by these processors. And that's how we were able to get our pecans processed. So it's still not totally good, but it's better than it was in the 90s.
Yeah, and I want to highlight that Ben and Jerry's, they are a social enterprise company, and having major companies like that take the steps needed to kind of intercede in a way to get those local products, especially from historically excluded communities where those resources were excluded from those communities. Doing what needs to be done to actually be able to purchase those products at scale. That's a big part of what we're working on with the Artisan Grain Collaborative. We actually have set up a working group specifically set up for that purpose, because it's one thing if you have people who are farming in a way that restores the earth, or have some other mission behind the products that they're developing, but if they can't sell them at market value at scale, then you can't ever really get anywhere without that support. So Paul, I think you look like you had something you wanted to add there.
Yeah, I was just going to add that in terms of successes and positive out of the old, what I would call the old new communities. Had it not been for the old new communities, of course, there wouldn't be a new communities today.
Right.
And so I know that the skills and experiences that Shirley and others get to learn back in the late 60s and early 70s helping to support and enable the work that's going on now at new communities at Cypress Pond. And of course, the funds that were received from the settlement were used to purchase Cypress Pond. And had it not been for that, we wouldn't have a new communities today. So while the ending of the old new communities was bad, had it not been for new communities in the 70s and late 60s, of course, we wouldn't have new communities today. And surely not only the experiences and knowledge, but some of the contacts that were made back then are still utilized today to help move us forward.
Absolutely. And I have a follow-up question for you, Paul. So I know you've talked about how you were a sharecropper, and I think probably most of our audience is maybe theoretically familiar with sharecropping. I know that my grandparents were sharecroppers and are from Alabama and Georgia. So I still have a lot of family there. And so they've told me a lot about their personal stories, but had it not been for that personal connection, I don't know that there was a place where I would have learned about the realities of sharecropping. So can you talk a little bit about that, and also what it would have meant if you had an organization like the old New Communities available to your family when you were sharecroppers, if you think that would have changed the trajectory of what you did afterwards?
Let me see how I should
Loaded
bring this.
question.
Well, I am the second youngest of 10.
Okay.
And I have a sister that's younger than me, and two of my sisters and I are the only ones who graduated from high school. And one of the reasons is that sharecroppers, children tend to drop, at that time, dropped out of school, especially before my time, were forced to drop out of school and work on the farm before they even got to high school, more or less finished. And the way sharecropping work is you, in theory, you're supposed to grow the crop and you share it with the owner. That's the theory. But in reality, the owner would generally loan you money at the beginning of the year, at some point. And you never really had a record of how much you repaid them. And so by the time you harvest the crop at the end of the harvesting season, all of your money went to paying a bill that you didn't know how much you had paid on or how much you owed. So you're always in debt. And for many folks, if they left the farm and they had debt, they couldn't come back, because if they came back, they would be arrested. And so I had older brothers who left Georgia, and if they came back home, they had to come back at night at some point where nobody knew they were there, because they would get arrested for having left in debt and owing somebody. So sharecropping was pretty brutal. Some very painful memories. I mean, I missed a lot of days of school because I had to stay home and work. I finished high school, but I had to stay home and work on the farm when that was time to pick cotton and the other things that you do on the farm. And so my primary goal was to get as far away from sharecropping, not from the farm, as I could, which of course I did. And so the other question was, what would have been like? My family was not involved in the movement and for fear. And I think if they had been an organization and they knew that organization, that there was a place to go if they were kicked off the farm, then it would have been a much different story. But when I grew up, there was just no other option but to stay there. And if, as I said, if you left, you left with the understanding that it would be dangerous for you to come back. That was my experience with sharecropping.
Thank you for sharing that. And just to give some additional context to our audience members, so often, and this was the case in my family, we had families who had experiences similar to Paul, and their singular focus was, we have to get away from this. And in many cases, you know, the North was, people saw that as a place to escape. There was the Great Migration when a lot of families moved from the South to the North, kind of in pursuit of this safer promised land where there was not sharecropping, only to be met with different systems of oppression. One thing that was very popular here in Chicago was called contract purchasing. And so I'm mentioning this because it ties into some of what Paul was saying. So contract purchasing was in Black neighborhoods, it was actually illegal to you couldn't get a mortgage on a home. It was illegal to lend in certain areas because the thought was that those properties could not hold their values, and therefore it would be not, banks have a fiduciary responsibility to the people placing their money with the bank. And so they had all of these rules. And so the workaround was they allowed Black people to buy homes using something called contracts. And with a contract, you would make payments on your home, but you never had any equity until the home was completely paid off. At any given time, the person who wrote the contract could tell you, hey, we have this fee that you have to pay, and it could be 3 times what your monthly payment was. And if you could not come up with it, regardless of your on-time payment history for 20 years, they would take your house back. And so people left this one system of repression and were looking to move into something else. And this really ties in, I think, to what Shirley has been saying throughout. I mean, that people, that hatred causes people to oppress and steal in ways that are largely invisible to communities outside of these, because you would think, why don't people just own their homes? Why don't people just leave the farms? Why don't people just work harder and go to high school so they can go to college? And so these experiences, I think, shed some light onto how those people were making those decisions. And it looks like we have a couple of comments. Let's see. So Marie says, as someone who grew up outside Augusta, Georgia, but never heard of New Communities until moving to Madison and being included in Margaret's wonderful buying club, I'd love to know how we can help promote buying practices with positive social impacts in less aware communities, many of which are closer to y'all's home. It's a great question. Paul or Shirley, do you want to take that one?
You want to go, Paul?
Could you just summarize the question again, because I didn't quite get the gist of it?
So the gist of it is that Marie would like to know how we can help promote buying practices with positive social impacts in less aware communities.
Okay. Well, let me share an initiative that we're doing, and then I come back, I think, to the question, because one of, as Shirley mentioned, for the first few years, we were essentially giving our pecans away. We were at the mercy of the wholesalers, the shellers, who would get your pecans. It's almost like sharecropping. So they get your pecans, and then they technically would bid them out to buyers. And you never knew whether you were getting the price that the bidders gave you or not. It was just a few cents on the dollars. And we are, among the African-American pecan growers, we are by far the largest. And so if we were having that problem, you can imagine what the smaller farmers were experiencing and still are. So one of the things we're doing is trying to create a Black pecan growers collaborative, where we're getting all of the smaller farmers together. And the first thing we have to do, of course, is to help improve their quality, because our quality, if you've experienced our pecans, you know that we have very good quality. So how can you help? Number one, I think, is to purchase some of our pecans and to share your experiences with others. And we're always looking, we're working with Red Tomato, of course, but we're looking for individuals as well as other organizations or groups of individuals to purchase from us. We have some limitations now in terms of volume, even though we're working on that. But I think as we build and develop this Black Pecan Growers Association, or collaborative, whatever you're going to call it, then our capacity is going to be much bigger. So getting the word out there, sharing our pecans. We've had folks who have called and said, I tasted some of your pecans from somewhere, in some store from some individual, where can I buy them? So I think just helping us to get the word out about the quality of our pecans and the availability, as well as making direct purchases, would go a long ways toward helping us, but also helping the entire Black pecan growers within the South, or within the area that we're in.
So
I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Purchases with you?
What was that?
Oh, I'm sorry. How can people make purchases from you?
Well, there are two ways. One is to contact Michael at Red Tomato, especially for large purchases. But if you're in the area and you're looking for smaller purchases, we sell pecans either in volume 30-pound cases or 16-ounce bags. If you're looking for, you know, a 16-ounce bag, a couple of 16-ounce bags, you can contact us directly. But if you're looking for larger volumes, then contact Michael Rosine, and I think I saw Marsha at Red Tomato, and they will take your orders and direct them to us. And I don't have the numbers in front of me. Maybe Michael or Shirley, you can
Drop them in the chat.
Yeah, put it in the chat. Yes.
And I want to do a quick time check. I'm not sure. Amy, I know we started a little late, but about how much time do we have?
That is entirely up to Shirley and Paul. I know because of our technical difficulties, we lost 15 minutes at the top of the hour. Are you able to stay with us for another 15 minutes?
Yes, I am.
Mhm.
Are there other questions?
We'll dig up some questions for these 15 minutes. Everybody get thinking.
I didn't want to
thank
plow
you.
ahead. Oh, I think.
And for the person that was in Augusta, outside of Augusta, at some point, if you're in the Albany area, then feel free to visit us. Once you visit us, I think you will be really excited about promoting our pecans.
Thank you. That's very kind.
In Marietta next week and might take that 3-hour drive down to Albany.
That would be great. Once you step foot on the property, we have you. There's, you know, the property that we have was once a slave plantation. We didn't know all of this history when it was purchased, but it's just a special place, a place where we are trying to really build and train. And I was just out on the place this morning and showing a person who was down an area where we have planted some pecan trees that's called Centennial. We planted them because the first pecan tree was propagated by a Black person who was a slave, Antoine. And we have that there for educational purposes, so our people can understand, you know, where we are with pecans today. If it had not been for what he did, we wouldn't be marketing them and the way that we're growing and marketing them today like we're doing. So it's just so special. And I can take you to other places on the property where we are doing things that are innovative. And when you look at our civil rights history in the area, you know, the culture and so forth, I mean, you get it all when you come there. So it's a special, special place, and you're hooked once you're there.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. So can you tell me a little bit, I know we've been talking mostly about pecans, but you guys have other crops that you grow there, and kind of what drives the decision-making behind what you're going to grow next?
Well, we have Satsuma oranges. And in fact, when I was taking this individual around this morning touring, I was telling them they're sweet, juicy, and easy to peel. And this is yeah, they you know, the Florida orange growing business has been running into some trouble for quite some time, and a lot of that is moving into Southwest Georgia. So we have oranges, and then we rode through the vineyard where the grapes are really looking good, and probably within the next month we will be picking muscadine grapes on the property. We are also we prepared the acreage, and will soon be planting loblolly pine trees that have been inoculated with truffles. And
interesting.
The only thing I knew about truffles before, I thought they were talking about a dessert. But then I'm like, I'm on a Zoom call. I'm like, send me a picture, show me a picture. You know, when I learned that by the 5th year, we should be able to harvest 200 pounds an acre at $500 a pound. It's like, oh yes, this is something we've been really need to be involved in. And this morning, and we also have a demonstration that we're working with on growing rice, looking at regenerative ag, using less seed, less fertilizer, less water. So if we can make this work there, this is something else we can introduce to farmers in the area. And the reason I was out with the person on the farm this morning, we got this call. He said he had some piney wood cattle that he wanted to donate to us, and they are registered. He can give us the papers. So he came down because we have to choose the area for pastures and so forth. And when I say you get hooked, he was hooked. He will be working with us not only on the cattle, but in other things there in the area. So I'm excited about bringing these cows on, and what that brings to the area, and how we can bring other farmers in too, because we put it there, but we don't just try to keep that for us. We try to work with farmers in the area to bring them along too.
Okay. So we have another question about the 50th anniversary events that you guys celebrated in 2019. So can you tell us a little bit about what that was like?
Yeah, it was we had people from all over. I had been told prior to that we had some folks on, and they say to get onto the property and hear that it was a slave plantation was, kind of, folk just didn't know how to deal with that. So we actually have a big banner that is placed at the entrance when we're having events like that, to say that this land was once owned by a slave owner, and it's now in the hands of descendants of slaves. So we actually had that there for everyone, but it was really good for us to see people who have adopted the community land trust model that we created, over 50 years ago, and using that in these major cities to deal with housing programs. We have this video, The Arc of Justice. It's about the rise, fall, and rebirth of new communities. And we were premiering that in New York, and I'm sitting next to a city councilman, and they are talking about using our community land trust model. And it's like, wow. And I learned just last week in a call that there are now 289 CLTs in the country.
That is really exciting. I actually, with my company, the Economic Justice Academy, we had a conference in February, and one of the sessions was on publicly owned banks. And one of our panelists actually discussed the community land trust model. We had another panelist who's the founder of a mutual aid network here. And so we were talking about how we could address some of the housing issues and the community wealth building and really community-led development issues. And so that was something that came up. So it is really exciting. I'll have to go back and tell everyone that was on that panel that I met with the creators of that original community land trust. But I think that this is just the beginning. People are becoming much more interested in these alternative models of ownership. So I'm very excited to see what comes next. And so since we just talked about the kind of anniversary, can you tell me a little bit about what your vision for the new communities is, and where you hope to see it in the next 10 or 15 years?
Yeah, we see it as a place where we can all come together for many reasons: for training, dealing with culture, for healing.
Yeah.
When we first purchased the property, we had what we call blessing of the land ceremonies. And we tried to bring together every ethnic group in the area, starting with the Lower Creek Indians. There's a group down in Florida, and well, it's not in Florida, it's in Georgia, about 70 miles from us. Reservation, that's where that was. Yeah, there is a reservation not that far away. And so we brought all of these groups together, and they did a blessing ceremony from their culture, which was so educational. that we see it as a place where we can try to come together to see if we can work together moving forward. You know, we see it as a place where our young people can come and learn more of their history. That's why we planted those centennials on the property, and that's why we have other projects on the property. And then helping farmers to look at how at the practices and the kind of farming they can do in this day. I'm feeling a bit down today because I had a farmer. We just had him at our farmer field day, and he called me today. He and his wife made a terrible decision. They were not in touch with us, and he inherited a farm that had some debt. He got behind on that, and he allowed someone to come in and let him put it in his name. He kept saying a friend, and I'm assuming that friend is a white person. He didn't owe but $52,000, and now just Thursday he was served with papers that they have 60 days to be off the property. If he doesn't pay them, if he doesn't pay that up, and he doesn't know now how much it is, he's been leasing it, but none of that has been going toward the debt. He said it might be $100,000 now. So he's calling me. You know, as we've been talking, it's on my mind. I don't know what to do, how we can save him. He's a very good vegetable farmer. We just gave him an award at our farmer field day. But, you know, we get that all the time. So a place where people, even though they made a mistake in dealing with someone, there is somewhere to go to see if there's anything that can be done. And I've been making calls this afternoon, trying to see if we can find a lawyer, trying to see what can be done. But that's the kind of place, that's the vision for new communities. And we look beyond that, right, Paul? That vision takes us all out of the country as well. You want to speak to that?
Yeah, we want to become the global model for agribusiness. And we have a master plan that spells out that vision. And we are now in the process of developing business plans and action plans to bring that to life. And I don't know whether you, any of you have seen the master plan. If you haven't, it's a really clear document of not only where we are, but where we want to go to and how we utilize the assets that are on the site. But we want to eventually go beyond Southwest Georgia, beyond Georgia, and beyond the US, and become a global model for how to do this kind of work.
That's really exciting. And I know I'm running out of time for my questions, but I guess I will wrap up with this and I'll ask my questions offline, and maybe we can share them online later. But if people want to keep up with your work, what are the best ways to stay in touch and to follow what you're doing?
Well, and I don't have them in front of me. We can provide them later, but the various websites. But if you look up New Communities website, the Charles Sherrod, and these are related organizations all working together. The Charles Sherrod CDC, Community Development Corporation, Southwest Georgia Project, and we're creating one now called the Charles Sherrod Institute, which is an umbrella for all of the organizations that are working together to do this kind of work. We also developing other social media platforms. But if you just look up New Communities, Charles Sherrod CDC, Southwest Georgia Project, and the Charles Sherrod Institute, you will be able to. Right. What was that, Shirley?
The Sherrod Institute.
I'm sorry, I said Charles Sherrod, the Sherrod Institute. The Charles Sherrod CDC and the Sherrod Institute.
Okay, is the master plan that you just mentioned, Paul, is it on any of those websites?
I don't think we have the master plan yet on any of those websites, okay. But if anybody's interested, in seeing the master plan, we can provide an electronic version of that.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to be respectful respectful of everyone's time, but Shirley and Paul and everyone who was able to stick around for the last 15 minutes, thank you so much for your grace and flexibility with us today. It was really my honor to be here. I'm inspired by the work that you guys are doing and can't wait to continue to learn from it. And with that, I will bid everyone farewell, and we will see you next time.
So when you're in Marietta, you should make that 3-hour drive.
Yeah, we're still figuring out how long we're going to be there, but we're heading down next Wednesday, I think, and probably going to be there for about a week. So I'm going to talk with my husband, and we're going to figure something out.
Okay.
All right. Well, I hope to meet you all soon, and have a great day, everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye.